Can you believe the name of his foresight is called Eleanor and Magic and Robert? What the hell does that mean? I guess you'll tell us, won't
The
you?
good, the bad.
What will be next week, the good, the bad and the disfigured?
No, the good, the disfigured, and the ugly.
For those of you who have come expecting to hear a foresight about spaghetti westerns, I'm afraid you're going to be disappointed. What this is, this foresight is nothing to do with my actual business at all, but it is to do with the project I'm involved in, which is called 2020 BC, which is about how the British community will look and behave when we get to 2020. And this is an intrinsic part of that, and it's actually to do with health. So there's a few people in the room here who will be interested in this topic. What is cholesterol? Any ideas?
Well, in Scotland it's a health food.
Any ideas? Any ideas what it is? Because actually we hear a lot about cholesterol, but actually what is it?
It's something.
Enzymes in the blood.
Okay.
Is it a fatty build-up?
Okay, interesting, isn't it?
Yeah, need it.
It actually protects your cells. It actually forms a coat around the cells which protects them being invaded. So it's quite important in that respect. It actually coats the nerve endings so that the synapses can actually function effectively, right? So it's very important in the electronic signals that go around our body. It's actually incredibly important in hormone production, and it's vitamin D as well. It's a great source of vitamin D. So actually, you cannot survive without cholesterol. It's fundamentally important, and it's not bad. All right? And you're going to hear some myth-busting stuff this morning about cholesterol. Okay, so pin your ears back. Right, the other thing is that people say I've got high cholesterol. I'll tell you something else, it's insoluble in blood. So you do not have a quantity in your blood. All right, so when they say you've got a cholesterol count of X, they're not measuring cholesterol at all. And it's carried about in the body, so actually cholesterol is carried around on something, and that thing is a lipoprotein, all right? So it's carried around in a vessel, and that vessel transports it around the body to do its job. Right, and there are various types of lipoproteins in your body, all right? And I'm going to go through the main ones that we need to know about for the purposes of this. VLDL, very low density lipoproteins. These are actually produced by the liver, and these are the important fellas, all right, these things. Then the next thing, which is part of what's measured when they measure your cholesterol, is low density lipoproteins. And if anybody had their cholesterol measured? Okay, and did you get two numbers, or did you just get one? One number, okay. They'll be measuring the total of the LDLs and the HDLs, all right? And anybody heard the term good cholesterol, bad cholesterol? All right, well, I'll come on to it in a minute, but LDLs is what they call bad and HDLs is what they call good. And they sum them together, but it's of no use to anybody, that number, all right? So, congratulations, you've got a meaningless result. There's no point in going in the first place, to be honest, and I'll come on to more about that later. And chylomicron is another type of lipoprotein. This is one of the big ones, all right, and this is responsible for taking things around the body in parcels. I'll come on to that again. And then the last one, triglycerides. All right, it's important to know what LDLs and HDLs are, but it's also fundamentally important to know what triglycerides are, because that's a measurement of how much fat's in your blood. And they don't tell you that either. All right, so you need all three. You don't need one number, which is irrelevant. So a raised cholesterol level is actually a raised level of LDLs in the blood, low density lipoproteins. That's what they're measuring when they measure your LDL levels and your cholesterol. And LDLs is the bad cholesterol and HDLs is good. All right, but both of these are absolutely fundamental to the correct functioning of the body. You can't survive without these, all right? And actually, I'll explain later, the mix of them is important, but it's not even that's that crucial. So what's the difference between these two things? All right, well, low density, all right, they're basically responsible for taking the energy and the cholesterol around the blood to the place where it's needed. That's its function. So is that bad? Taking energy to your cells? I would say that's fairly good thing to be doing, all right? So this name of bad, all right, is actually, I suspect, slightly out of character for the job that it's doing. And HDLs, they're deemed as good because what they do is clean up the excess LDLs in the blood, all right, and take it back to the liver. That's its function, all right? So the Hoover job, they're classing as good. The transportation to where it's needed, they're classing as bad, all right? So it's not quite right, is it? I'll explain why that is later on. So how does it work? How does all this work? Right. Well, we eat fat and cholesterol. That's something that we do. And I'll come on to what those two things are in a little while. The fatty acids, which is essentially the fats and the cholesterol, and the cholesterol as well, that's not a fatty acid, but those things are absorbed into the wall of the intestine. That's what happens to them. And these are the three types of fats that we absorb in that way: saturated, monounsaturated, and polyunsaturated. And what happens is they get attached to a glycerol module, and it becomes a triglyceride. All right? And that then enters into the bloodstream. Okay? And then we've got cholesterol. All right? And cholesterol is packaged. If you imagine a car with 4 seats in it, all right, 3 seats taken up by your fatty acids, and the fourth one is the cholesterol. All right? And they're packaged into this chylomicron, which is the car, and it's sent off to the liver. All right? That is the first and last time that fats and cholesterols meet. All right? And I'll explain why that's an important statement in a bit. All right? So what happens is these chylomicrons go off to the liver, and there are some of them float about in the bloodstream. All right? And these triglycerides into the bloodstream, all right, which is something you need to measure as well. So that's how it works. So here we go. The chylomicron transports our parcel off to the liver, and what the liver does is it produces very low density lipoproteins. That's its function, all right? And they biodegrade in the blood to become LDLs over time, all right? So if you eat something which is essentially going to create VLDLs, all right, when you eat something, though the measurement of VLDLs will go up in your blood for a period of time, right? But LDLs won't. Low density lipoproteins are biodegraded VLDLs. So nothing's going to affect what you eat is going to affect the LDL measurement in your blood. All right? It won't affect it. Okay, so it remains static. The LDLs remain static. All right. So what happens then is that the LDLs they go off around the body and transport energy to your cells, et cetera, to coat the cells and wherever they're needed. And there'll be an excess sometimes, and that's about measurement. All right. And that's quite an important point here. And I'll talk about body monitoring in a minute. So the LDLs drop the energy where it's needed, and then what happens is the HDL comes along and it cleans up all the excess and any spent LDLs, and it transports them back to the liver to do a little recycling job. All right, so it's a pretty good system, this. It works quite well. All right. The amount of excess LDLs that are floating around in the bloodstream is a direct response to the body's capability to monitor that and control it. So does anybody understand what diabetes is all about? All right, well, diabetes is where your pancreas has fails to produce the insulin that's required, all right, for you to absorb energy into the cells. And basically it's the body's monitoring process that ceased to function. And we have a similar monitoring process for the quantity of LDLs that are required in the blood. All right? And if it fails, that's when you've got a problem. But in normal people, it just monitors it and it's fine. So you don't get a huge excess of LDLs and HDLs. You get what you need because the liver's delivering what's required. All right? Now, one of the myths is that extra cholesterol is going to sit on the inside of your arteries, all right, and it's going to choke them up. All right? That's a myth, I'm afraid. All right? And it's a myth because why would the plaque, which is what it's called, suddenly just stick to parts of the artery? Otherwise it'd be happening from day one, wouldn't it? So the only time it happens is when you have a problem with the artery and it sticks to that to patch it up. right? And it's like a kink in a river or something. It kind of silts up around the bit that's damaged. And the problem with strokes is that if a bit of that breaks off and it ends up getting lodged in the brain, you can get an embolism or something like that, which causes a stroke. Right? But in normal people, that doesn't happen. So this idea that excess cholesterol is going to choke up your arteries, quite frankly, is rubbish. Okay, so what are the long-term effects we're told of bad cholesterol? Right, so too high cholesterol levels in the blood. What are they? Let's look at some of those. Narrowing of the arteries, that's one that we get told. Reduction in artery elasticity, actually more caused by salt than it is by cholesterol, to be honest. If we have a reduction, then the heart has to work harder. If that works harder, the blood pressure goes up. If the blood pressure goes up, you're more likely to get cardiovascular diseases. All right. So is that reasonably self-explanatory? If the arteries are not elastic, they can't expand and contract. If they're narrower, it means the heart's got to work harder to push the blood through. If it's working harder, it's doing too much work, you are more likely to get a cardiovascular problem. All right, so that's what that's about. So that's the effect that we're told about bad cholesterol. Let's just have a look at some stats and figures, because this is an important CVD and heart disease is a big problem. 180,000 deaths in 2009 from cardiovascular disease. That's 1 in 3. Right, so it's a big problem, this, but we're going to see whether it's a problem to do with cholesterol or not. All right, it's responsible for 28% of the premature deaths in men and 20% in women. So it is a huge problem. 45,000 under 75s died from cardiovascular diseases in 2009. And it's the most common cause of death, people under 75, 70% of men and 8% of women. So it's a big problem. And in 2009, 25,000 deaths under 75 as a result of it. So cardiovascular disease is a big problem. So what can you do to minimise your likely chances of getting CVD? Well, there's 3 things you can do. You can monitor the food you're eating, you can do relevant exercise, and there's medication, all right, which I'm going to go through each of those now. So, cholesterol in food. Here's another myth buster for you. These are the types of foods that you're going to find cholesterol in. Prawns, eggs, liver and kidneys. They're the main places where you're going to eat cholesterol. And I'm going to tell you something else now. It doesn't matter how many of those you eat, it's going to make no difference to the level of cholesterol in your blood. So stop worrying about it. All right. Fats. All right, let's come on to fats now. All right. There are nuts, seeds, olive oil, avocados, oily fish and oats. All right. They're all good things. Yeah, they were told to eat lots of these, all right, because they contain good fats. All right. And bad fats are in things like meats, oils, chicken skin and cheeses and stuff like that. There is no correlation between fat and cholesterol. None. Doesn't matter what you eat of these, it makes no difference to the cholesterol in your blood. Which, when I was researching this, I knew quite a bit about it already when I was researching it, I found that quite extraordinary, because I said, well, tell me what the correlation is then between fat and cholesterol. And I struggled with it, and I struggled and I struggled, and there wasn't one. That's why I'm struggling, because there is no relation. The only time those 2 things come together is in a chylomicron, when it's in the intestines and it's taken to the liver. But apart from, you can't make cholesterol from fat. They're 2 different things. It's like trying to make cheese out of chalk. It doesn't work. So those, what you eat here is not affecting your cholesterol. Right? And then we've got trans fats. That's the other type of fat. It's like a man-made fat, all right? And you get that sort of stuff in biscuits and things like that. And I mean, as good practice, you want to steer away from them, because they're not actually very good for you. The body doesn't really understand what they are. So it doesn't, and that's the same with things like the sweeteners in Coke and things like that. The body has a real hard time trying to understand what it is. You're better off drinking the full-fat stuff, because at least it knows what sugar is. Okay, exercise. Strengthens muscles, improves your cardiovascular system because it gives it a workout, it boosts your immunity. These are all good things. Improves your circulation, and it prevents diseases of affluence, which are the things we've got. It's quite ironic, isn't it, that we've got people starving in the world and then we've got people who are eating themselves to death. Right? And we're eating ourselves to death because we're giving ourselves obesity, which is causing heart disease and all these other things, type 2 diabetes, etc. All right, but exercise improves your mental health as well, so it's not a bad thing to embark on. Then we've got medications. Everybody here on statins?
What was the question?
Statins.
I used to.
Right, okay. Right, what statins do is reduce the liver's capability to produce cholesterol. That's what it does. All right, it suppresses your ability to do that. It has some quite bad side effects as well, like increasing weight, and has some other side effects which can actually make people go slightly strange as well. So it's not an ideal thing to be putting on. You're okay now, though. Now, I'm going to talk about relative risk and absolute risk, because the doctors have been sold some really good marketing to say that there is a 50% reduction in the risk of getting to cardiovascular diseases and stuff if you take their drugs. Right, 50%, which means it could have gone from 2% to 1%. That's 50% improvement, isn't it? But it isn't much of an improvement, is it? Right? So absolute reduction is 1. Now, don't want you to worry about the maths here, but 50,000 lives saved over 5 years is a term that they use. That's the kind of number. So it sounds pretty impressive, right? But only if 10 million people have been checked. That's the first thing. So that's 1 in 200 people, which is a 0.5% absolute improvement. So if over 30 years you were on this drug, you'd basically reduce your risk by 3%.
And have all the side effects.
And have all the side effects. Is it worth it? Okay, interesting when you look at the facts. So let's have a look at, just have a little bit of a recap here. Eating fatty foods does not increase cholesterol. So forget that. It just doesn't. It might increase the amount of fat in your blood, but it doesn't do anything with the cholesterol. Dietary cholesterol has a negligible effect on the level of cholesterol in your blood. Fats are never converted into cholesterol. Actually, a raised cholesterol level is a measurement of a degraded LDL, which is a VDLDL, which is an LDL. Only relationship between saturated fats and cholesterol is they happen to be carted to the liver in the same car. Right? And LDL is not actually made by the body at all. It's a biodegraded VLDL. So there's a few myths there that I'd bust there. The ugly side to all of this, by the way, is that there are people out there that have got an interest in your health, which is not quite what it seems. All right? We've got pharma companies producing drugs who are driven by profit and sales. What they do is pressure, lobby, market, and influence the government and the health service. All right? And these people are basically the government anyway, by power, control, money and opinion. That's what they're driven by. If they do something which changes 2% of the population's opinion, they're chucked out of office. All right? So they can't be too radical. So they listen to what the pharma companies are doing, and they take the easy option, which is say, well, here's all the proof I need. I will now sell it to the population. So we end up doing things not because it's good for us, but because it's good for them.
Yep.
All right? And it is up to you, all right, what you do about this. That's the ugly, by the way. So how do you know if you've got a problem with your cholesterol? Okay, how do you know? Well, it's easy to look in the mirror and say, bloody hell, I look awful. I must be ill. And it's easy to leap on the scales and say, oh, I must do something about my weight. They're easy because they're external. But what do you do about it when it's something that's internal? Well, we end up going to the hospitals, we go to doctors, we go to clinics, all right. This takes time. It's not that convenient. We've got to wait and hang around maybe 3 weeks for the results. Often we don't know of any symptoms. Sometimes it can be painful. And the most important one is that we're not quite sure we want to hear the bad news. So the majority of people don't get tested because they don't actually want to know the answer. And that is the vast majority of reasons why people don't get tested. Right, so in terms of cholesterol, what does that mean? Well, there are no symptoms. What you do need to do is check to find out what your normal is. I'll say that again, to find out what your normal is. Because there's a rating of 5 as the total cholesterol, right? Well, that might be 1 bad and 4 good, which is not a problem, all right? It could be your cholesterol's 8, right? But if it's always been 8, it's still not a problem. The only problem is if it was 8 and it goes to 12, or it's 8 and it goes to 2. Something's gone wrong with the monitoring system inside your body and you need to address it. So it's not a question of what the number is, it's important of what the number's doing. Is it going up or is it going down? So you need to have it, find out what yours is, monitor it and then review it. So if you're not, be knowledgeable about this, because it's if it's gone wrong, you need to fix it. And you've got to take responsibility. And that's the key really between about 2020 BC. We're all moving through an era now, which means we've got to take more responsibility for our lives. And this is fundamental to that. Okay, so that's it.
Thanks, great.